So good afternoon, everyone. It's great to have you here with us in this Meet the Funders session. My name is Adele Bucella. Many of you might know me already. I'm head of unit in the URBACT Secretariat. And this afternoon's session is basically all about cohesion policy and the basics. Let me say, it's really an introduction to what cohesion policy is and how it's particularly relevant for cities. We have several things that I'd like to cover this afternoon. I want to give you a first taster of a guide that we have produced in the Secretariat, all about cohesion policy. It's a simple guide with lots of links, and it's basically a document to try to put everything in one place for you, our beneficiaries, to simplify your lives in terms of finding information. I'm supported this afternoon by Brume Delaunay, who is a colleague of mine in the URBACT Secretariat, and she will present to you the national funding sheets, another tool that we've designed to help you, with the support of the national URBACT points, find the most suitable funding for your integrated action plans. And I'm also joined, I'm very happy to say, by a colleague here from the Interact programme, who will help us understand a little bit more about cross-border cooperation programs and also how they're relevant for you in cities looking to fund the actions of your action plan. So I don't know how many we are in the session now, but I suggest we dive straight in. We've got 45 minutes and lots to cover. So let me share with you the first hot off the press information about this guide document that we have produced, which is called An Overview on Cohesion Policy Opportunities for Cities. And my aim here is to really give you a taster of what's in this very short guide, and we'll share the link with you, obviously, to where you can find it, and then you can go and look yourselves to seek out further information. So this guide has 5 main chapters. It covers the general principles of cohesion policy. It covers the financial aspects in the multi-annual financial framework. It covers the new, let's say, enhanced urban dimension of cohesion policy. It also helps you to understand how these funds are all managed. And it focuses specifically on some of the tools that are available for territorial development projects, particularly in cities. And as I said, my aim today is really to introduce you to this simple guide, not to tell you everything that's in there because we don't have the time for that. So very quickly to run through the main content that you can find, the things that you can find. So in the first part of the document, we introduce cohesion policy, which basically, as you probably know, aims to strengthen the economic, social and territorial cohesion of the European Union. It aims to encourage a more harmonious development of the countries and regions, and this is why it's particularly focused on the less developed regions of Europe. But all of the European territory is covered somehow according to their needs. Cohesion policy is implemented in partnership between the European Commission and the national or regional bodies that manage the funds in the different countries. And it basically covers a 7-year period. And you probably know we've recently started a new programming period last year from 2021 up to 2027. The big aim of strengthening economic, social and territorial cohesion is hopefully going to be achieved through these 5 policy objectives, which you see here, which are all about being more competitive, smarter, greener, more connected in terms of mobility, more social and inclusive. And policy objective number 5, which is particularly relevant for URBACT, being closer to citizens by fostering sustainable and integrated development in particular types of territories. And all of these activities have funds that are linked to them. And this brings us to the second chapter of our short guide on what cohesion policy is all about. This second chapter is about the MFF, and no doubt you've heard those letters, that acronym, in the news. The multi-annual financial framework, which basically sets up and regulates the long-term budget of the European Union over the 7-year time frame. And in this new programming period, there's 1.2 trillion euros available in this multi-annual financial framework. Our guide will give you an explanation of the main cohesion policy funds, so the Cohesion Fund, the European Social Fund, and the European Regional Development Fund, which funds URBACT activity, actually. And it will also explain to you the Next Generation EU and Recovery and Resilience funds and how they're managed, and where the focus, where the, let's say, thematic focus of those funds is. So you can find all of this information and more links in the second chapter of the guide. The third chapter, as I said, focuses on this new urban dimension to cohesion policy. And in this new framework, in this new 7-year period, the support for cities is growing quite a lot. And this can be illustrated through a number of different initiatives, new initiatives and continued initiatives. So the first is the renewal of the Leipzig Charter, so the new Leipzig Charter, here really focusing on the key principles of just, green and productive cities. We've got the creation of a European urban initiative, so bringing together capacity building, knowledge and innovation into this heading of a European urban initiative. And we have the continuation and the renewal of the urban agenda for the EU, which again thematically supports cities with knowledge and learning on how to do things in the cities. And also importantly, from a financial perspective, the ERDF budget, the regulations state that at least 8% of the ERDF allocation nationally should be allocated to what they call sustainable urban development. So again, a financial focus on cities. In terms of the management types, why are we telling you this? We're telling you how the funds are managed, because actually it helps you to know how to, who to go to and how to access some of these different types of funds. And by understanding the management mechanisms, it's sometimes easier for you to access the funds, because you know who you need to speak to and where you need to find additional information. And some of this will also be expanded further when Broom introduces the national funding sheets. So I won't spend too much time on this part, but it's interesting to understand who's in charge, basically, and where those funds are managed. This is the fourth or fifth chapter of the guide. I can't remember. And the final important element in this guide is we've illustrated and provided some extra information on the tools for territorial development. Some of these tools are specific to urban spaces, and some of them are, and all of them actually, are managed nationally. So our advice is mainly for you to make contact with your national or regional managing authorities to try and find out how these different tools are managed nationally and how your city can participate in those. And some of them are not new, but they're very interesting tools in terms of processes that you can use in your cities. And in this chapter, you can also find out some information about financial instruments, some of which previous URBACT networks have actually used. So they may seem out of reach to a certain extent, but some of our cities have actually already used them. The final part of this guide is a MIRO board, a MIRO tool. Let me explain quickly the logic behind the board, and maybe Broom can zoom in a little bit so we can see where we are. You can basically, there are three main categories to highlight. The first one is all around the cohesion funds themselves. So you can find here the main funds, let's say ERDF, ESF, and you can also find a number of other lesser known, I would say, social and social cohesion and values, it's called, funds, ones that are less known, I would say. And what you can also see on the board is that when the funds themselves are particularly relevant for cities, we've put a red border, a thick red border around those funds. Maybe you can, yeah, so Broom is showing that to you on the screen there. So you can pick out which of the funds are quite easily spot which funds are particularly relevant to you as a city administration. So that's the first thing to note. The second thing to note is that there's a second category, which is entitled, we've called it interesting headings. It's mainly around three main entry points. One is the kind of natural resources. The other is around migration, and then more innovation, digital, sort of growth, investment and growth. And here you have a number of programs that are with all of them have interactive links, so you can click on them and it takes you to the place where you can find the source of information. And then the third category, again, here, the same principle. For example, for Horizon Europe, this is a program where URBACT beneficiaries have gone to in the past. So we've put the red border around it to show that it's of particular relevance because it's already been accessed. And then we have a third category, which is what we've called financial instruments and other tools. And it's really here where you find prizes and things that are, like European capital labels, that kind of thing. So, and again, all with interactive links. Okay, well, I would suggest then that we go to the Slido poll. I think you've probably had a chance to have a quick look at this board. And I see that Broom has also put the link in the chat to the full document. So perhaps now's not the time to go and look at the full document, but so yeah, can we launch the Slido polls? I think you should be able to see on the event, not the event, but the session bar, the Slido, and you've got a question there, which is a very simple question. Did you find what you were looking for? So yes, very easily. I did, but it took me a few minutes to find my place, or no, I'm lost. And so just a quick appreciation of the MIRO board and how you found it. Okay, so I'll hang on a few minutes for people to answer, and then we'll see. And as I said, if you've got comments on what I've presented about the guide or about the MIRO board, then we're really happy to see them in the chat. For us, this is the first kind of presentation that we've done of this guide. So your feedback is always useful. If you think anything's missing or it could be better. Okay. So shall we see what the results are then? Okay. I don't see the results. Do you see the results, Broom?
Yes, I think you have to vote to be able to see the results.
Okay. Well, I'll say that it was very easy, but I think that's probably cheating a little bit. But okay. Well, not surprisingly, it took people a few minutes to find their place, but that's quite normal. But okay. So 4 of you are lost. I would ask you just to let us know in the chat how you think we can make it easier to to help you find your way around these tools, or maybe you just detest things like MIRO boards, which I can also understand on some days, to be honest.
But Alisa mentioned something that it's possible. It's that we transform the MIRO board into a PDF document, and we also have the link, so everything is possible with MIRO. So of course we can do.
Yeah, good idea. Okay, can we have the next question on the polls, please? So, would you use it again? I think this is for us an interesting question, because we are obviously, our business is designing tools for you, but we want them to be useful and we want them to be used. So if it's not something that's useful to you, or if you prefer it in an alternative format, like Alisa said, maybe in a PDF, then that would also be good and useful for us to know. So I'll wait a couple of minutes for, well, a couple of seconds, let's say, for people to vote, because it's quite a quick and easy question. It's not rocket science. Okay, perfect. So maybe we can have a look at the results. Okay, good. Well, that's generally quite positive. And the ones that said no, maybe also we're interested to know why. I'm not going to force you to use our tools, of course, but we are interested to know why, because it helps us to design things that are relevant and useful for you. Okay, so we're just about on time. So I'll hand over to Brum now, just to give us a quick introduction to the national funding sheets. And then we'll come back and have another quick poll.
I think there's a problem with my sharing screen. Okay, better now. So I'm going to introduce you the national funding sheets that we are going to design for all the countries that are involved in the URBACT project. So it's a 3-page document, as you can see here, and it gathers useful and strategic information concerning EU funding opportunities in your country in order to implement your projects in the field of sustainable urban development. So here is the cover. Here, the first page focuses on general information. For example, you have the contact points. For example, the URBACT national point. You also have information on the coming calls, for example, but here we do not have yet the date, but we will update the document. And also, usually, you have a general website with all the information. It's the one for Slovenia. It's concerning the cohesion policy. And then you have a space focusing on the RDF and the ESF and the cohesion fund. And you have different information, for example, the type of governance. For Slovenia, these funds are managed nationally. You also have the managing authority, the contacts. It's usually a link or email addresses. And then finally, you have the budgets. And there is also a space dedicated to maps when needed. And for example, here for Slovenia, we have a map with the 2 different NUTS regions, because the Slovenia is subdivided into 2 NUTS regions. And you have the different information because the amount of ERDF and ESF budget are not the same. And it's also the case for other countries, but for others, you won't have maps, it depends. And then the last page gathers all other interesting, relevant funds for you in your country. and it's the same structure. You have the governance, the budget, the managing authority, the contact, and sometimes links when useful. So here is the sheet for Slovenia. We also have the one for France that is ready. It's the exact same structure, but for France, the ERDF and the ESF are managed regionally. That's why we designed an interactive map. So if you click on the link here, you will have the different information per region. For example, if you go to Île-de-France, you can click on the different links and you directly go to the website for Île-de-France, and you also have the contacts. So you can access the map by clicking on the link under the map. And for the rest, it's the exact same structure. And as you may have noticed, some information are not known yet, and we will regularly update the fact sheets to provide you with the most accurate details as possible. And we are currently producing all these sheets for all the countries. And so don't worry if you do not have yet the national funding sheet for your country, just because we are designing it. And the same, we can go to Slido to have a comment, some questions on this document. So I invite you to click on the Slido tab, and can we have the next question? Yeah, perfect. So the question is there anything you would like to see added to this national funding sheets? It's an open question, so we'll let you answer. For the moment, no one answered. Maybe I'm not able to see the results yet. Hello. So we have national specific funds. Indeed, it will be the case. For some countries with national specific funds, we will dedicate a space to gather this information. Deadlines set for different calls. Indeed, for the moment, we do not have the date because it's not decided yet or public, but it will be at the bottom, the top of the document, next to the URBACT national point. You will have the information for the different calls. Okay, timelines or national priorities in future funding. Okay, noted. It was something that we discussed with the national URBACT points, and we do have the information, so we could also create a space on this document to talk about this. Perfect. Links, examples of successful applicants from URBACT networks would be great. So I think for this, you can directly go to the URBACT website, to the NUPS space, the NUPS pages, and you will find these informations. Okay. So I turn it over to Adele to move on to the next part of this session. And thank you very much for your attention.
So thanks, Broom. I think you'll agree that they're a really good resource, which will require regular updates. So we're working with the national URBACT points to help us with putting as much information as we possibly can into these national funding sheets. And we will be taking your comments from the poll there and working on them to try and see how we can include those different pieces of information without them becoming huge, monstrous documents that are unmanageable. Okay, so great. Well, we're now coming to the final slot of our afternoon session around cohesion policy, and I would like to welcome Bernard Schurzberger from Interact, who is going to tell us a little bit about cohesion policy, and in particular the cross-border cooperation programs, and tell us how they're particularly relevant for cities with a few examples. So I'll share my screen again, this time with your presentation, Bernard.
Thanks, Adele. So I was asked to give a brief introduction to the world of Interreg, with particular things, points which might be of interest for cities. Please, let's immediately move on to the next slide. When it comes to Interreg, we're talking actually about a very small branch of cohesion policy. It's funded from ERDF, and it's a branding for cooperation programs across borders all across Europe, plus neighboring countries. And a couple of figures. So total funding from ERDF for Interreg is about 9 billion. So you see already it's a very small piece of the cake when looking to the overall budget of the ERDF. The bulk of money from Interreg goes to so-called cross-border programs, so between neighboring countries. But there are also a couple, 14 transnational programs. Those are programs covering usually parts or several member states. And there are then finally interregional programs. And the program I'm working for is called Interact, is one of these interregional programs going all across Europe, same as URBACT, or for example, a program called Interreg Europe, which allows for cooperation from regions, cities all across Europe. But of course, if you look, for example, at the funding for the overall interregional programs, it becomes quite clear these are not investment programs per se. So when it comes to what is of interest for cities, for sure, the most interesting programs, I would assume, are the cross-border programs, because they are by far the biggest. And what is also quite interesting about Interreg is that it has a quite substantial funding rate, which is up to 80%. But all these programs are run in shared management, meaning, for example, the funding rate applied in the program is then an agreement between the two participating member states. So, for example, ERDF funding rates in some programs might be lower than the maximum. Please, to the next. So, the program volume as such has been calculated, allocated by quite sophisticated mechanism, but it depends largely on the size of the program areas, which is not 3 regions along the border, and let's say the population numbers in these border regions. And then you see immediately that size of programs differs immensely across Europe. I've listed a couple of examples. So the program between Spain, Portugal is about 320 million ERDF for the period 21 to 27. It goes for medium size, for example, the program between Saxony in Germany and Czech Republic, 150 million from ERDF. And then there are even very, very small programs between, for example, Bulgaria and Turkey. So one example along one of the external borders. Funding volume from ERDF and so-called pre-accession fund IPA 2 amounts to about 14 million. And it's quite obvious that when you look the program volume as such, the bigger the program volume, the likelier it is that you have a chance to finance an investment project. It's important to see it's a precondition for each and every project in Interreg that you have at least one partner from the 2 participating member states. So there is, with a few exceptions, no way that a city funds a project on its own, but you have to find a partner to go for a project. It's all shared management, and there are so-called managing authorities, which bear the responsibility towards Commission, and they have the supervisory function also for the program. And these are usually regions or ministries, depending on the administration, on the administrative setup of the member state. These managing authorities have joint secretariats, and these are, let's say, the technical operative arm. They usually do the day-to-day work. And then there is a so-called monitoring committee taking decision on the project. Why I'm mentioning all this is, if you're interested in developing a project for an Interreg program, you have to have real face-to-face contact with the joint secretariat. Because all these programs, there is one Interreg regulation governing all the programs, but it's obvious that each of the programs developed its own program culture, which depends then on national legislation, the different approaches to administration, different cultural backgrounds. Then there are many program-specific rules. I would say a lot of them explicit, you will find it in program manuals, but a lot of these rules are implicit. And it's really, I would say it's compared to mainstream programs where you often have mass fabrication of projects because each and every project is the same. Doing a project in Interreg means really manufacturing your specific project. There is no mass project in Interreg, but it is really very specific projects tailored to the interest of the program, to the needs of the region, to the actors in the program area. Next, please. And then I've picked out, to illustrate a bit what happens, I've picked out the project selection criteria. What we did in Interact is a process called HIT, and HIT stands for Harmonized Implementation Tools. And this is developed, I would say, you could say in a focus group of programs, and there they agree on a basic consensus on a set of criteria, on a set of tools, on a set of templates. And here I've picked out those selection criteria agreed in the framework of HIT. These are quite obvious ones, and I've highlighted in yellow those which are, of course, very specific to Interreg. First point is the project relevance. If you want to understand it a bit, it's best to have a look into the program and see the specific objective you're interested in. For example, all internal Interreg cross-border programs had to take Policy Objective 2 from Cohesion Policy, which is largely greener Europe. So all issues of environmental protection, adaptation to climate change, etc. Plus Policy Objective 4, which is interesting, more social Europe. But most of the programs picked the specific objective on tourism and cultural heritage there. So, for example, this is each and every internal cross-border program will have at least these two, next to the fact that most of them have chosen Policy Objective 1, Smarter Europe, on research. The key point for a good Interreg project is, of course, the cooperation character. And here you should have developed the project having a cross-border impact which is obvious and can be easily understood by everyone. Because usually the monitoring committee consists of players from various ministries, regions. Ministry of Environment, for example, is usually in Ministry of Transport, is usually in the monitoring committees, for example. And these people don't want to read any complicated projects where it's very hard to find out what's the real cooperation aspect. So the better, the more concise, the more clear your cooperation rationale is, the better your project will be rated in the project selection process. Obvious point is, of course, if you develop a joint infrastructure for joint use, this is clearly cross-border, or you can clearly prove that cooperation across the border leads to higher efficiency in one or the other aspect. intervention logic is clear. Let's say one point is sustainability, durability. And here, of course, infrastructure projects come in handy for most programs, because here the aspect of sustainability and durability is, in most cases, quite clear. Partnership, that's the essential aspect. So when you're developing a project, you have to choose your partner really well. So that has to be a match to make your project be relevant, to make it a good cooperation project. So this is essential. Very usual setup is, of course, a partnership between two cities across the border, but we will see with the examples also there are many twin cities along borders. These are also obvious candidates for good Interreg projects. I think I will not go into any details on the operational criteria. This is well known. Of course, everyone looks into the budget, and there it's quite clear that all the assessors look for the 3 E's when looking into the budget. It's about economy, efficiency, effectiveness. I'm stating this because these projects are mostly hand manufactured, so each and every aspect of the project is looked into. So it's really important to develop jointly your budget and to get in touch with the joint secretariat at an early stage of your project development. So please, let's move on to the last. Here I tried to summarize a couple of examples of projects which had been done in previous periods by cities. There's one famous example. This is a tram line, a cross-border tram line between the cities of Strasbourg and Kehl. And you can see, for example, the investment volume for the latest project on the extension, which meant to build 1 kilometer of bridge and a couple of, I think about 900 meters of stretch of tram line, about 4 million euro total investment volume, about 50% funding rate from ERDF. And I would say, when we talk about Interreg, you will see an investment project in Interreg cross-border. I would say 5 million is already substantial, and then at the bottom of the list you see quite an exceptional example. What I wanted to point out, jointly used infrastructure is obviously welcome in every cross-border program. But cross-border programs might also be handy to prepare investment. We have put another example. It is about the railway line between Vienna and Bratislava. And there was an Interreg financed feasibility and environmental impact assessment for the electrification of this railway line, which is also quite a substantial volume if you do all the planning work for such a project. Then I've picked out an example of a twin town at the Estonian-Latvian border. They built up the city center from Interreg funds. Then we come to example of Grand Région is an interesting example because it's a multilateral cross-border program, which is rather unusual. But for example, there is a European agency, and they did a major project on greening a formal industrial area and building a network of cycle routes. Again, 5 million across the border, crisscrossing the border. That brings me then to, I would say, the high end of cooperation, which is in the program between France, Spain, Andorra. It's quite famous across Europe in the Interreg world. It's a Hospital de Cerdanya, where the construction enlargement of an existing hospital has been financed. 30 million euro investment volume. It is open for patients from Spain and France. They tackled all the social insurance issues. This is, of course, the centerpiece of legislation, which is, I would say, as important as the building as such. And the interesting point is that it's even managed by a cross-border legal entity, a so-called European grouping of territorial cooperation. I would say that's it. What I forgot, but I'll deliver it after the session. Interact has developed a joint portal for all Interreg programs. It's www.interreg.eu. And there you have an entry point with information for all the Interreg programs across Europe. And then regarding timing, Interreg programs, it is likely that most of the programs will be now approved between April and August. And a couple of programs, but mostly transnational ones, have already started pre-calls, but I would expect that the bulk of calls will start September this year. But if you have a serious idea what you would like to develop, I can only recommend to get really in contact with the Joint Secretariat of the programs quite early and start discussing your idea. That's it, Adele. I hope.
Okay, great.
Bit of
Thank
an
you
intro.
so much. Thank you very much for that introduction, and in particular, I think for the examples, because the examples speak quite loudly to what is possible, and some of them are relevant, I think, for some of our integrated action plans that the cities are producing. So we've come to the end of our session today. I hope 45 minutes is very quick, so we've given you a lot of information in a short space of time. I hope it wasn't too difficult to keep up, but you have lots of links and documents available for you to follow up with. If you have any questions at all or comments you would like to share with us, then don't hesitate to either put something in the chat, which we'll still see, or you can send myself or Broom an email directly. No problem at all. We'll respond to you. What I would like to just ask you to do very finally before we leave is in the polls, not the Slido this time, I think it's in the normal poll. If you could just rate the session for us, it's very useful for us to have your feedback to know how we did and how we can do better. So thank you very much for your participation, and we'll see you tomorrow in the next in the morning session. Back on the Hopin platform. Thank you very much.